last thing on this section before we move to the last one is just the question, what we just talked about. Is homosexuality a choice or is it genetic? This would say no. God gives you over, and therefore the natural inclinations that are in all of us, the sinful nature is going to kick in. And so this supports an idea that is from Scripture that homosexuality is not a choice. It's not a choice. I mean, it is a choice. It's not genetic. I'm sorry, I had that backwards. Just testing to see who's awake. All right, jumping over to verse 28. Here's the next domino. God's wrath, tips, sexual immorality, degrading passions, and now we have yet, verse 28 starts off with furthermore, another domino. So God's wrath happens and three things immediately fall into place. Furthermore, since they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, he gave them over to a depraved mind to do what ought not be done. Or the NASB says, just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer. So here they are. They did not acknowledge God, and they were given over to a depraved mind. The Greek dictionary describes it like this: it's worthless, void of judgment, tested and found useless, disqualified for its intended purpose. So we have just, instead of a useful mind, we have what's the equivalent of spiritual brain dead, spiritual coma, spiritual uselessness here being communicated with depraved mind. And the consequence we see of that depraved mind that applies across the society. This is not for those who are sexually immoral or gravitate toward homosexuality. This is not the sexual this spews forth all evil. So now you have, as a result of this third effect, the consequences found in Romans 1:29 through 31. Just all evil. There's 3 verses of evil listed here. 3 verses of just word after word after word of sin, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, or another translation says they invent new ways to sin, disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, and unmerciful. I know Mark mentioned last week the disobedient to parents. That sort of doesn't seem to quite fit in. I read somewhere or I heard somewhere that was a capital offense back in the day that the Bible was written. If you were disobedient to your parents, you could be executed. So here we have a third result. And the thing to notice here is the prevalence. This isn't just the sexual immoral, as I mentioned. This is across all the society. And then finally, that leads to the last verse in verse 32. So all these things happen, evil sets in, and although they knew the ordinance of God, that those who practice such things are worthy of death, they do not only do the same, they do not do the same actions, but they also give hearty approval to those who practice them. So a society has these things happen, these dominoes, and in the hearts of men and women, it culminates in this depraved mind that says, I'm not only going to do those things, but I'm going to encourage people to do that. And that's what prompted me last week when Mark asked for questions about how things manifest in society. It was on the forefront of my mind. Things like out in California where they just legislated, we're going to teach homosexual history to elementary school kids. We're going to explain, this is a homosexual person, and this person was great because he planted the first crop. Or they're going to find things that we've never accounted for as being important, and they're going to say, well, this is a historically important person now, and to make sure homosexuals have a place. Or so that's just an example that was on my mind. So let's talk about our society for just a minute. Does that sound something like America? Does that pattern seem to fit with where we're at in America? I think it does, and I think we're at the depraved. I think we're into the depraved mind domino and all the things that come from that, and we're in the verse 32 section. I think you can't, and that's evolution. Evolution's another example. You can't even talk about anything else. You can't even mention creation as a concept. And so here we are. They encourage others to think the same way. So I mentioned this is a series of cause and effect ripples. We actually started in the center. What is the actual cause of the abandonment wrath? What is that actual cause? Let's go back to Romans 1:18 and read that again. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against the ungodless and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in righteousness. So, without belaboring it, but I'm going to just to emphasize the point. We have cause 1, which is suppressing the truth, which leads to effect 1, which is the wrath of God. So suppressing the truth is what leads to the wrath of God. And then we have all the other dominoes that we just went through. So with that said, it seems that the solution for a society that has rippled into these dominoes is who's experiencing the wrath of God is to look at what does it mean to suppress the truth. What does it mean to suppress the truth? And that's the part that I've left out. We skipped from verse 18 over to 24. Verses 18 through 23 discuss what it means to suppress the truth. Further, let's just read the whole passage, 18 through 23. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which was known about God is evident within them. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, been understood through what has been made, so that they are without excuse. For even though they knew God, they did not honor God or give thanks, but they became futile, and another translation adds, and godless in their speculations. So their philosophies and their thoughts were futile and godless, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, here's an important verse, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. Verses 22 through 23 in the Amplified Bible says, professing to be smart, they made simpletons of themselves. And by them the glory of the majesty and excellence of the immortal God were exchanged for and represented by images resembling mortal man and birds and beasts and reptiles. It's a bit of a stretch to ask the question now, but how do you think that might manifest itself today? Global warming. Evolution. Evolution is so. This is a passage that deals with all time. You can look through history, and we've seen pictures of statues of animal worship. We've seen from the Egyptian. We didn't see it here, but you may have seen pictures of men with birds' heads, deifying that type of concept, making images of those. That's how we've seen it in other cultures. But here in our culture, we have forsaken what God treated, that God considers. He's very proud of it, isn't he? In Genesis, in the last day of creation, he says he looked at everything he'd made once he'd made man, and it was very good. It's where God. It's one of the few things that God says. It has this connotation of, I'm proud of this. This is very good. When a people forsakes and replaces it with godless principles, they can expect the wrath of God and the dominoes to fall into place. And so that's why I was kind of excited about this passage. In kind of wrapping up one chapter, we'll spend 5 more minutes on one other thing, talking about how this passage seems, when you break this passage down, and if you just kind of meditate on it, this is talking about evolution and that concept, how you think. It's not necessarily saying evolution, but it's talking about that concept. If I had a screen, I'll just show you this. All this is right here is just simply the cause and effect. So you have ignore the Creator and worship creation rather than the Creator, right here, leads to wrath, then leads to all the dominoes that we talked about. So that's how to look at the cause and effect relationship of this verse. So at this stage, I'm going to shift gears and we're going to look at another passage to close out today. And next week we'll spend with the day one. That'll probably all we'll be able to get to next week. Now, me being a skeptic, so I would not. In fact, up until recently, I didn't ascribe this much weight to that passage of Romans. Right. I did. I said, okay, that kind of sounds that way. But I like to see multiple scriptural sources. So let's look at one more passage. But before we do, and I'm going to do this in 5 minutes quickly, quick science lesson. I mentioned the concept of uniformitarianism. So this concept of uniformitarianism is a concept that, and you've heard the idea, I'm sure, maybe not the term. It says the same natural laws that operate in the universe now have always operated the universe in the past. So, and another way to say it, you may have heard this in other classes of school back in the day, the present is the key to the past. So the idea being that these natural forces of the earth the plates coming together, or the warming core of the earth, or the weather patterns that erode the Grand Canyon. Those processes have always been in place since the creation of the world, since the beginning of time. And that's what shaped what we see. And for 6 billion years that this earth has been around, those forces have been in place. That's uniformitarianism. It's the single largest influence of all science, or geology, I should say. That's really the core of geology. Let's contrast that with another big word, catastrophism. That's an idea that a series of big events instead happened to shape the earth. So we see catastrophism in the earth. 6 days of creation. If all that happened in 6 days, that's a very catastrophic, or 4 days really, that's a catastrophic force on a small ball of rock in space. Secondly, the flood. The flood. Suddenly, water gushed from underneath that had been stored up. It gushed up, and so much so that it says the mountains rose when this happened, because the underground was being evacuated of water. And so suddenly, catastrophically, within 40 days, our world was changed to a relatively flat, where they say mountains, they were really hills back in those days, in early part of Genesis. And suddenly, you see these striatia happen, these cataclysmic events. So that's catastrophism. A gentleman named Stephen Gould, who died in 2002, but he was a major voice of uniformitarianism, just philosophy. He wrote, this will blow you away. This sums it up. So he's not a Christian. So put that. These philosophical propositions must be assumed, uniformitarianism, before you can proceed as a scientist doing science. You cannot go to a rocky camp and observe either the constancy of nature's laws or the working of unknown processes. It works the other way around. You must first assume these propositions, and then you go out to the crop of rock. So here you have defining the parameters of science to say you can't consider God. If you're going to be a scientist, you cannot consider God or creation, and if you do, you are not a scientist. So real quick, let me close with this passage from 2 Peter 3. 2 Peter 3, I said, I need a secondary source to understand the wrath of God as being related to evolution. Okay? 2 Peter 3, 3 through 8. I had never seen this, and it deals with the end times. Imagine that. I missed this one, even when we talked last time. First of all, you must understand that in the last days, scoffers, or other translations say mockers, will come, scoffing or mocking, and following their own evil fleshly desires. They will say in these last days, where is this coming he promised? Ever since our fathers died, get this, ever since our fathers died, everything goes on as it has since the beginning of creation. There, right there, is uniformitarianism that's preached in the latter days. Everything is the same way it was since our fathers died. The commentators say that means since the earth was created. In fact, it says here, but they deliberately forget, or another translation says are willingly ignorant of this fact. The earth was formed out of water and by water. By these waters also the world of that time, the world that then existed, was deluged and destroyed. So uniformitarianisms say, absolutely not. We cannot consider catastrophism. There it is, as clear as day right there. Uniformitarianism, not any form. In fact, they limit it here to hydraulic catastrophism. That's the idea that water moved across the earth. God separated the land from the deep, and then Noah. The waters changed everything. So here's the two examples of hydraulic cataclysm, and we're contrasting in this passage in the end times. By the same word, the present heavens and earth are reserved for fire, being kept for the day of judgment and destruction of ungodly men. So we just got done talking about creation here, and then we contrast with verse 8 that's oftentimes, I think, misquoted. But do not forget this one thing, dear friends, with the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. But the day of the Lord will come as like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar, the material elements of the universe will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything in it will be laid bare. This passage is not saying, oh, by the way, one day in the creation account could be 1 billion years. That's what people use that 1,000-year verse oftentimes to say, well, God's... No, this is in the passage of in the last days, referencing fire coming to destroy the earth in the same way that creation happened in 6 days. And he's saying, basically here, I've always thought he's saying, I've suspected this, and now that I see it in this light, I think he's telling us, you have 6,000 years, people. You have pretty close to 6,000 years. The earth was created in 6 days, with the seventh day, a millennium, last millennium. to rest. Here you have clearly tying creation to the last days and 6 days. Make sure there's nothing else to close it out. That's a perfect spot to close out.